Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the session on how to extend your workflows to your on-prem data. My name is Shomo Day. I'm the chief architect for Quickbase. I've been with Quickbase since 2001 and have had various roles in our engineering org. And today, I lead the technology strategy for all of Quickbase. Nicola?
Hello, hi everybody. I'm Nicola Tasev. I'm glad to be here. I have been working with the team more than 5 years on the pipelines product. Currently, as an architect, I'm driving the technology strategy for the Quickbase integration solutions. And I'm excited to share with you some of the things that we have been doing.
Awesome. Before we jump into this, into the presentation, wanted to get the legal stuff out of the way. As you know, this is not a feature yet that is in general availability. So please do not make any purchasing decisions based upon the content here. So before I jump into the agenda for today's session, I do want to mention that this is largely going to be a technical talk track oriented towards a technical audience. Primarily because, as you will find out, that this is something that in order to be operationalized, you will have to work with your IT partner. Even having said that, we will try to make this as accessible as possible. So if you do hear certain terms in the presentation that you're not familiar with, please reach out to us either in the Q&A session or after that, and we'll be happy to delve into the details with you. So with that, we wanted to cover 4 things today. First, wanted to give you an overview of what it is that we are trying to achieve in terms of liberating your on-prem data. Then give you a quick overview of the Quickbase pipelines feature for those of you who haven't had a chance to use it yet. Then we are going to go over the Onprem Agent architecture, go into the details of how it's hosted, how it's set up, so you have a good idea of how to operationalize it. And then we are going to jump into the demo of how you're going to actually, how it works and how the data moves back and forth. So let's get into the actual on-prem data. You know, when we look at Quickbase, we do understand that, you know, we don't exist in an island. We recognize that you have data in possibly multiple other SaaS software that you're using. And usually what you want is for that data to work seamlessly between all of those systems. So with that in mind, what we have enabled with pipelines is a way for you to integrate with your other cloud vendors like Salesforce, like Jira, like QuickBooks, like Google Docs, and effectively to be able to bring in data into Quickbase and take data from Quickbase into those systems without writing code. And so that is really the heart of the pipelines infrastructure. However, one of the things that's fairly normal is how do you actually bring in data that is not publicly available, but it's still valuable data? So for example, what happens when you have your data in a SQL server that is on-prem, but is not publicly available. How do you bring that data into Quickbase? That is really the heart of what we are trying to solve here today. And today's session, we are going to go over our solution in terms of how you do that. So to make things a little bit concrete here, let's say that you are trying to create a Quickbase to manage your employee review and feedbacks. And so on the left-hand side, you'll recognize a fairly straightforward Quickbase applications with a few tables like employees, which have reviews and peer feedback in there. And you recognize that when you build this application, that you actually do have all of your employee data, all the data that you need to base this application off in a SQL Server database. So data like your employee name, your employee ID, email addresses, salary, all of that information is already there. The problem is that it is in a SQL Server database that is on-prem, that is not accessible and publicly. And so the question is, how do you bring that data into that Quickbase that you're building? And so we are going to try and solve that problem. So traditionally, the way that folks have solved that problem is really using three approaches, one of three approaches. First is what I would call the manual upload approach. And effectively, what this amounts to is that you partner with your IT contact and figure out on some periodic time frame, your IT person sends you a data dump of the employee table. And that could come in either an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, doesn't really matter, but it comes to you in some form. And you then manually import that data into your Quickbase app using our import feature. That works, but it is manual, and therefore it is error prone. And secondly, it is nowhere near real time. And third, of course, that it is kind of unidirectional, more or less. So the second approach is a little bit better, and I'd call it's more semi-automated. And that approach is effectively somebody writes some scripts that extracts that data from SQL Server into a CSV file that is put in the SFTP on an SFTP site. And then perhaps you use something like our sync feature to pull that data into Quickbase. Again, a slightly better, however, two things. One, it is still not real time. And secondly, it is also unidirectional, right? You're just moving the data from the master data source on-prem into Quickbase. And then finally, the third solution is to write a custom script that effectively is written against the Quickbase APIs. And this is a perfectly valid solution. And you can get to any level of complexity because you are writing the logic yourself. However, what this means is that you have to host the script. You have to also upgrade it when it needs to need be. And then finally, when things like the schema changes or you have to add some more logic, you have to go through the normal software development lifecycle and upgrade the script. So it's still, all of these are quite valid, but as you can see, it requires a fair amount of either loss in terms of the real-timeness of the data, or some level of investment for you to manage the process. And so what we are trying to do is we are trying to make this much, much easier so that you don't have to invest the time and effort to bring the data into Quickbase. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to make this so much easier? So the crux of our solution really is based upon a piece of software that we call the Onprem Agent. And it's a piece of software that we've developed that you host on any operating system that you want. So you can host it on Windows, you can host it on Linux, and even on a Mac if you so desire. And the purpose of this Onprem Agent is to effectively mediate between your on-prem data source and the Quickbase pipeline infrastructure. And to do this in a secure way so that the transport of your data bidirectionally, if you so choose, is done in a secure manner. And as you will see, all this requires is that if your data source it happens to be something that supports an ODBC connection, then you are good to go. And again, your data source, I've been using the term SQL Server, your data source can really be anything. It can be an Oracle database, it can be SQL Server, it can be a MongoDB, it can even be an on-prem Jira instance, for example, that supports an HTTP API. So any system that supports an ODBC or an HTTP API is a candidate for this Onprem agent to talk to and effectively liberate your data from your on-prem from your on-prem area. So effectively, what you would do is that you would install this Onprem agent on your host of choice. You would configure it to, let's say, if you're using the ODBC connector, to connect to your database system of record. And because you are maintaining the ODBC connection yourself, you have complete control over the permissions. So it is up to you as to which table, which rows, which records you grant access to this Onprem agent to query. And therefore, the Onprem agent then effectively queries those records that are of interest and sends it securely over to pipelines. And again, as I mentioned, this is bidirectional. Data from Quickbase can come over and come back into your system of record that you're maintaining on-prem if you so desire. So before we go into the architecture of the Onprem agent, I wanted to walk you through, give you a kind of a bit of an idea of what pipelines are for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it and how it works. So as you know, in Quickbase, when you create a Quickbase app, what you effectively get a opportunity to do is to manage your users and your data. You enter data into your Quickbase app and you give permissions to different users to use that data. And you also and the Quickbase app also lets you run reports and analyze your data. That is what you get when you create a Quickbase app. Along with that, I think there are two other really important capabilities that we introduced with pipelines. And they get even more important when they work together with your Quickbase app. And those two capabilities are orchestration of your workflow and integrations. So what do I mean by orchestration? What I mean by orchestrations is basically when an event happens in Quickbase or in another system. So for example, record changes, a record is deleted, a record is updated, that sort of thing. You can write if, then, and looping logic to create fairly complex workflows that you on those events, on those triggers. And you can say, for example, look, if this record matches these set of criteria, transform this record and then go and update these two other systems, one of which could be Quickbase or it could be some third-party system like Salesforce. And that's the integration part. So the orchestration part, the ability to run logic, and the integration part, which is to flow the results of the transforms into other system. Those two together is what is provided by our pipelines infrastructure. And so a Quickbase app working with pipelines infrastructure gives you a really powerful capability to not only manage people and data and report and analyze, but also create really powerful workflows. So how does the pipelines work? What's the anatomy of a pipeline? So as I mentioned, the first thing in the pipeline is the notion of a trigger, which is when will a pipeline get invoked? And as I mentioned, the events are things like records are created, deleted, that sort of thing. Alongside those kind of events, you can also do something called polling, which is that you can say something like, I want to search for all records that has changed in the past hour in some system, whether it's Quickbase or whether it's some third-party system like Salesforce. And you can do that too. And we consider those triggers as well. So two variants of the same idea. So once you've defined the trigger in terms of when a pipeline will get called, then what you can do is create your workflow, and we call those steps. These are the individual things that you can write to do those complex logic. So for example, you could say, well, okay, great. I've retrieved all these records. Now I want to filter within these records. I'm interested in only those records that meet that criteria. You can do that with the if-then statements. And once you've collected those subset of records, you can loop through those records and say, okay, great. In order for me to update the record in some other system, I need to first transform it. So I'm going to use formulas or something like that to transform those records. And then at the final step is that I'm going to send those records to a third-party system, which again could be another Quickbase app or the same Quickbase app, or it could be a system like Salesforce, QuickBooks, Google Docs, what have you. And those third-party endpoints, we call those channels. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to make your on-prem data just another channel in your toolbox so that you can use that to bring data into Quickbase or move data from Quickbase into that on-prem data source. So great. So now that we've covered kind of the essence of the problem that we are trying to solve, namely bringing your on-prem data into Quickbase and vice versa, and you've gotten a sense of how pipelines work, I'm going to let Nicola explain the next level details on the on-prem agent architecture and how it works securely to do all of that. And then we are going to jump into the demo. Nicola?
Yeah, thank you, Shomo. So when we initially started to design this feature about the on-premise agent, we analyzed what are the possible approaches towards such a solution. And we put in front of ourselves the following requirements that we wanted to meet in order to have a solution that will be universal and it will be easy to use by our customers. So the first requirement was to have a simple installation method so that the participation of specialized staff of IT personnel is limited to a minimum. The second requirement was to really have a universal multi-platform solution, which with the same approach can work on all major platforms, namely Windows, Linux, and even on a Mac for certain cases. The third requirement we wanted to have is to be firewall friendly so that our solution can be configured easy, if at all needed any configuration, with corporate firewalls, because we know that for enterprises, security is a very important thing, and a lot of on-premise configurations are with very rigorous security measures. So that's why we opted for a simple communication protocol, which is firewall friendly and operates over only outbound connections. So the communication is originating from the on-premise agent towards Quickbase servers, and it uses a single TCP socket that is capable of multiplexing bidirectional data streams, which are required in order to achieve the bidirectional data flow, which you will see also in the next steps in the demo. So having these requirements, we decided to have this software component, the on-premise agent, because it seems that this approach fulfills all these requirements. Another typical approaches that sometimes are used are VPN solutions, or asking the enterprise to open a firewall port so that the vendor, in this case Quickbase, can have inbound connections. However, we thought that these are far more involved and more complicated to set up than having a software component that our customers can install. And it actually provides very vertical, very focused communication solution that very securely and with a single purpose implements the needed communication. So going in a more detail about what are the communication paths here. So here on the right, you see the enterprise on-premise network, where the pipeline's on-premise agent needs to be installed. It can be installed on any machine in that network, given that this server has connectivity to the required target services, be them either HTTP or a database accessible over ODBC. So once this software component is started, it initiates a standard HTTPS connection to the Quickbase cloud services via a standard REST API in order to get initial configuration, dynamic encryption keys, and all kinds of initial data. Once this configuration is retrieved over this HTTPS endpoint, it opens the single TCP socket, which is used to tunnel the actual data. This socket uses the curve ZMQ protocol, which is based on the popular 0MQ network stack, which we use for this communication. This allows us to have bidirectional and secure channel that fulfills the requirements to have to carry multiplex bidirectional data streams. So if we go through the rest of the components that participate, we have the pipelines execution engine, that is the component that actually performs the execution of a pipeline. The pipeline that, for example, Shlomo showed you with the particular steps. Then this pipeline consists of various channels, and some of these channels, like the ODBC channel or the Webhooks channel, which we'll be able to see further in the demo, are able to tunnel their communication via the on-premise agent. For this purpose, these channels can communicate with the on-premise agent server, which terminates the connection coming from the on-premise network. Pretty much on the enterprise side, the only thing that needs to be configured, and sometimes it is even allowed by default, is the enterprise firewall should support this HTTPS, standard HTTPS communication from the on-premise agent towards the Quickbase cloud services. And also it should allow this single TCP connection over a fixed TCP port so that the tunnel can be established. So having said that, we can move on to see how this actually works. Our product demo has the following steps. So first, I will show you what are the components which are involved in this workflow, which we briefly mentioned in the previous architecture diagram. Then we'll see how actually the ODBC channel can be connected to a database in pipelines. And we'll see how pipelines is accessing data via the ODBC channel and performing bidirectional synchronization of that data. And finally, we'll see how actually we can also leverage the on-premise agent technology to communicate with arbitrary HTTP REST services working on the enterprise network. So coming back to the example that Shlomo was showing you in the beginning of the presentation, we have our Quickbase application here about employee reviews. However, it is lacking any employee data. And we're going to use the Quickbase on-premise agent to fetch the data, which resides in an on-premise Microsoft SQL Server relational database. Let's see how this can be done. So this is the Quickbase app that we still need to populate data into. And this is the pipelines interface where we define the pipelines, which are the formal definition of the workflows that you implement. Before we go into the actual pipelines, in order to have a connection with the on-premise agent, we need to make sure that this feature is enabled. And also we need to configure this agent with its security token. So in the settings page, we have a dedicated section on the agent where it can be enabled and disabled. And the particular on-premise agent component is authorized access by using an API token, which you can get from here. This is a step which is done one time upon the initial installation. Then when the agent is running successfully on the premises, it sends this diagnostic information so that we can see here that the tunnel is established and communication can move bidirectional. Let's see how this looks on the on-premise side. So here we have a virtual machine, which for this demo resembles a server in the enterprise network. And on this server, it's a Windows server, we have the familiar services panel that shows the local services. And among these services, we can see that we have Pipelines Agent service, which is running as any other Windows service, which is the typical way how people will implement this on a Windows server. If the host operating system is Linux, then this component runs as a Linux daemon. Upon the initial configuration of this service, you need to provide the API token, which we saw on the previous screen, and it becomes part of the initial setup of this component. Once configured, it is part of the service configuration and doesn't need to be dealt with. On the same machine, we have the Microsoft SQL database server running as well. And here we have the target database that we want to fetch data from. So for this example, we have a database with an employee table, and this table has the following fields that define the employee data. So let's see how these data will be accessed from a pipeline in order to import these data into the Quickbase application. So now coming to the pipelines section, and here we have a way to flexibly filter the defined pipelines. We have several pipelines defined. One other initial step which needs to be done before you define a new pipeline is connecting the ODBC channel. So in order to connect the ODBC channel, similar to how all other channels in pipeline behave, there is a connect dialog. And in this connect dialog, you provide some configuration which is channel specific. For the case of the ODBC channel here, you can provide the standard ODBC DSN, which is evaluated on the machine where the on-premise agent is running. And with this DSN, you specify the type of the database, the name of the database, the authentication method, and everything which the ODBC DSN standard allows. And here we need to check this checkbox that we proxy the connection via the on-premise pipelines agent. So having done this once, this gives us the so-called account, which is the authenticated connection towards the ODBC channel. So having this out of the way, we can then define arbitrary pipelines that formalize the workflows that we want to implement. So for this case, we have a pipeline that does initial full synchronization from the on-premise Microsoft SQL Server database to the Quickbase app. So here is how this is done. We are able to search the rows of the SQL Server database using the search rows pipe in the ODBC channel. So here we have the ODBC channel and the available steps for it. So this is the query step. Here we can write SQL, and this SQL is written in the dialect of the target database. It is actually executed directly by the on-premise agent against the target database. So if you have, for example, Oracle database, you'll be writing PLSQL here. If you have Microsoft, you'll be writing Microsoft SQL syntax here. The statements here are directly transferred to the database. Here you are able to specify, as usual, the column names which are fetched from the database. So you have direct explicit control which columns are fetched, and only the ones which are listed here actually leave the on-premises network. Then we're on the next step. We are preparing a bulk import operation that will help us to import the records as a bulk into Quickbase. And in a loop, we are iterating through the results of the query. Here in the body of the loop, we are able to specify and actually manipulate the data coming from the SQL Server database. And actually here we define the mapping between the fields in the SQL database and the fields in the Quickbase app. So here we specify the table in Quickbase where we're importing data and the fields in that table on the Quickbase side. And here we specify how the values will be read from the SQL Server database. The language here is like a formula language, which is called Jinja, and it allows a lot of flexibility and power in data modification. For example, if you notice on the SQL side, we have a single column, which is the employee name. However, the Quickbase app has two fields for first name and for last name. And here, using the Jinja template language, which is like a dialect of Python, we can perform, for example, splitting of the employee name to first name and last name. We have a whole section on this Empower, a great tutorial on the Jinja capabilities of the Jinja language. So I encourage you to take a look at this Empower session, which is called Becoming a Jinja Ninja. A lot of power is achievable through this language. So here, that's how we define the mapping of the data. And eventually, we commit an absurd operation, which means that we either update the data in Quickbase, in the Quickbase table, or we insert new records. Now I'm going to run this pipeline so that we'll see how it actually will read the data from the SQL Server database and import it into Quickbase. Here we see the audit record that show the execution of the individual steps, and we can see that eventually the pipeline completed. So now if we come back here and refresh this page, we'll see how the data from the SQL Server arrived into the Quickbase application based on the conversion which you saw in the pipeline. Next thing is actually that now that we have this data and we can work with it in Quickbase, we might actually want to update some of these fields. And it would be nice if we can propagate these updates back to the SQL Server database, which could be the system of record. So for this direction, we have another pipeline that reacts on updates of particular records on the Quickbase side. So this one uses the Quickbase channel, and it begins with the record updated. So it reacts on, for example, salary field update in the employee table and gets engaged when the salary is updated. And it executes an update SQL statement towards the SQL database so that it propagates any updates of the salary or social security number fields. Note how here we support the standard SQL syntax for parameters, for parameterized SQL, so that you do not construct SQL statements using string manipulations. So this ensures safe operation and avoids risks of SQL injection and other undesired side effects. So here we have separate fields for separate inputs that match the fields in the SQL database, and you just specify the values that are this time taken from the Quickbase app that should be written. Here again, these allow you to write Jinja expressions and perform data manipulation. So let's see how this works. I'll show the audit records here, and let's see how this will happen. So if we take an example employee here, let's say that this employee got promoted and their salary from 68,000 becomes 88,000. So this is the initial data that came from the SQL Server database. And here we have this employee on the Quickbase side. So see here, I will change this 6 to an 8, and we'll save the change. And we'll see here now how this pipeline will pick the updated record from Quickbase, and it will execute the needed query. So to propagate the data. So now if I refresh the screen, see how now it's still showing the old value 68. If I now re-execute this, you can see how this field changed to 88. So we have bidirectional synchronization between the data in the Quickbase app and the SQL Server. Again, the logic of this synchronization is completely under your explicit control by the formal definition of the pipeline. So we see how easy and how powerful can be the synchronization of data using the ODBC channel. But having the on-premise agent set up once allows you as well to communicate with on-premise services that speak the HTTP protocol and have a REST API or some similar HTTP-based API. Here is an example pipeline that utilizes this. So in pipelines, there is a channel called Webhooks, which is like a Swiss Army knife about implementing HTTP requests. And this channel is capable of not only doing requests to HTTP servers on the public internet, it is also capable to tunnel these requests using the on-premise agent technology. So whenever we want to use this, we just need to set this flag here to proxy connection via the on-premise agent, which will mean that the URL and everything else in this step, which defines the HTTP request, will not be executed and evaluated in the context of the public internet, but rather it will be executed in the context of the server on the on-premise where the pipeline's on-premise agent component is running. So here is how it works. For the demo purposes, we have a very, very simple HTTP server here running with Node.js and implementing a very simple HTTP API. If we hit this API on the /URL URL path with the GET request, we get a JSON response with a list of names. But imagine here you can have an arbitrary, complicated on-premise microservice architecture, services implemented in Java, in .NET, that reside in the on-premise network. All these are accessible using the same technology. So this service runs on the local host, on this Windows server on port 3000. And note that it doesn't have authentication, so it cannot be exposed on the public internet safely. However, since it is running on localhost on this machine, where the on-premise agent is also running, the whole complexity and security is shifted from being responsibility of the service here into being responsibility of the on-premise agent. Just a second, I will actually activate this server here so that it actually starts listening. So I have it turned on. And now if we go back to the pipeline and execute this pipeline, you'll see how hitting this service on this port returns the same set of fields that were defined in this source file. Again, this is very simple simplified example, but it shows the potential and the power of this technology and avoiding the need to actually expose on-premise services on the public network and dealing with the security risks related to this. So this was the demo part, and I'll be happy to summarize the key takeaways which we went through. So the first one is that you can connect your Quickbase application and the data which is hosted in Quickbase in the cloud. You can integrate this data with the data on premise, and you can do this with a simple, secure, and reliable solution that gives you bidirectional synchronization of these data. The next key point is that the solution is based on a software component on the on-premise agent that is installed on a server that just needs to have accessibility to the local resources that are needed. And this gives you both the simplicity of installation and the power to control the communication of this on-premise agent and have explicit control over the data which is flowing there. The third thing is that this on-premise agent allows you not only connectivity to on-premise ODBC databases, but also connectivity to any HTTP-based service which is reachable over the local intranet. So I will be glad to answer any questions that you may have. You can post these questions in the chat and we'll be glad to answer you.